And immediately after this fiasco, and before Joshua knew anything about Achan's wrongdoing, Joshua went to the Lord in prayer saying, oh, you should look at this, chapter 7, verse 7, beginning. Oh, sovereign Lord, awesome way to start a prayer. You're saying to God that he has the ability to do what he wants. No strings attached to him. Of course, God knows that and no one can do anything anyway, but it's good to recognize that in prayer. Joshua starts out, oh, sovereign Lord. Then the rest of it. Why did you bring us across the Jordan River if you're going to let the Amorites kill us? If only. Joshua's become one of the phonelies. If only we had been content to stay on the other side. Lord, what can I say now? That Israel has fled from her enemies? Now, when I read this account, I have to tell you, I don't read it religiously. I read it straight up. Joshua is blaming God. Joshua is accusing God for this. Joshua is saying, you have led us purposely over the river to annihilate us. And nothing could be further from the truth with God. It wasn't his will for Israel to lose one game. Joshua goes on in verse 9 to say, and it's telling, for when the Canaanites and all the other people living in the land hear about this, God, they will surround us and wipe us off the face of the earth. And then, what will happen to your great name and honor in all the land? Wasn't it 40 years earlier that Joshua had been one of the 12 spies sent in to the nation of Israel to gather intel before they had the campaign? And wasn't it Joshua and his buddy Caleb who came back with the go-ahead plan? And now Joshua sounds exactly like one of the pessimistic and doubting 10 spies. As if he were saying, I wish I hadn't obeyed you. I wish I hadn't allowed you to guide me here to the outskirts of Ai. And therefore, when Joshua prays to God, if only we'd been willing to stay on the other side of the Jordan, I think he was really thinking mostly of his own feelings. Don't we do that? Even though Joshua was asking God to protect the reputation of his name, note what he says first. He says, what's going to happen to Israel? We're going to become a laughingstock. And so God interrupts his prayer to say, in effect, don't you blame me for the defeat at Ai. It's Israel's fault. And then God gave Joshua instruction for discovering the culprit, Achan. In the noise of life, in the noise of battle, Joshua had failed to trust in the Lord. Joshua surrendered in prayer. He struggled in prayer. And next Joshua just stopped praying. Disregarded it. Ignored it. Dissed it. We pick up the story in Joshua chapter 9. Now Achan's sin that had caused so much of the nation's remorse and defeat at Ai had already been dealt with. And Israel then finally claims her second victory over Ai. And next on the list of cities in this great campaign was Gibeon. And the citizens of Gibeon heard about Israel's great might, and you can imagine they were quite terrified. This is a rolling machine in front of us. So they devised a plan to deceive Joshua into thinking that they were from some distant land that posed no threat to them. I guess in this way they were hoping that Joshua would have to sign a peace treaty with them. And then Israel would be morally unable to exterminate them and their pagan ways, even if the ruse was uncovered. And the plan just worked like a charm. We've seen it before in Scripture. The Gibeonites brought worn-out sacks, worn-out and holy wineskins. They got out their old sandals, the ones to the back of the closet, and the clothes you wouldn't even give away. And they put those on, and they made the impression they had come from a distant country, having heard how great Israel is. And they even pulled stale bread out of the garbage before they left. And when they got there, they said, this was fresh when we left a long time ago. And it all looked so convincing. If you don't hear anything else I say today, hear that. It all looked so convincing. Chapter 9, verse 14. I put my ribbon marker there all week in my Bible. I don't want to lose where it's at. I advise you to take a pen or a pencil, or maybe take your brooch or pin or, I don't know, your knife out and prick the person next to you and sign their blood in it. But look at chapter 9, verse 14. The men of Israel sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. Ate, but didn't pray. The Bible indicates that if Joshua, the Bible does indicate that if Joshua had been in prayer, he would have known that this was a deception. It just occurred to me, if anybody in Israel would have been praying, they would have known. I guess Joshua thought this was an open and shut case. Well, there's a faith lesson. Requiring no communication with God. Been there, done that. But Joshua's assumption led to an irreversible mistake that Israel is going to pay for centuries. Joshua, even in the next chapters, later on has to take time out to fight Gibeon's enemies because, well, they're subservient to him. And Israel's got to be their protector now. But more than that, God had to set his people, Israel, as he brings them in as a holy nation. And now they're forced to live with people of Gibeon whose culture did not nurture spiritual life. Scripture is unequivocal. If Joshua had requested guidance from God, he most certainly would have learned that there was a deception brewing. Think of the patience of God not to say something. Think of the patience of God not to answer when he knows. I read a quote this week. I wish I'd have said it, but John Chapman beat me to it. He said, the only way to pray is to pray. And the only way to pray well is to pray much. James, the brother of the Lord, wrote that maybe the most common case of unanswered prayer is prayerlessness. He said in James, in chapter 4, verse 2, you do not have because you do not ask of God. And would you please be honest with yourself this morning? How often does something like this happen to you? You decide to pray about something. It comes across your heart and your mind, and you add it to your electronic or your paper or your mental list. And you might even tell people you're praying about it. But then, be honest, you don't. Because life and the battle happens around you. Is that what Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6 had in mind? When the writer said, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. And seek his will in all you do, and he will direct your paths.